So you just got your new Bronco ATV and UTV shocks, but how do you get the best performance out of them? That's what we're going to talk about next.
Make sure that you do a monthly inspection of your shock absorbers to see if they needed replaced. Look at the bushings at the top and the bottom to make sure that they aren't worn, and then look at the body. Inspect it for any damage, dents, or corrosion. Next up, take a look at the area around the piston shaft and inspect it for leaks or pitting. Finally, jounce the ATV. It should come back to its normal resting position immediately without multiple strokes or waves of the suspension. If you find any of these issues, it's time for a replacement.
So you've got the shocks, you've taken them out of the box. Now it's time to make sure that you're going to get the ultimate performance out of these. Now, the biggest thing on this, these have adjustable preload on them that has a screw type preload adjuster on it. But how do you know where to put this? The first thing is we're going to cover how you adjust it itself. In that, this is basically a lock nut for the nut that actually adjusts the preload on it. So what we're going to do is we are going to use this, and we are going to loosen that lock nut so that way we can adjust the preload. Now, as you see here, this is making it so we can either compress the spring or we can make it go a little bit longer. So we'll stretch this out a little bit, and then what we'll need to do is we will take this, and now if we need to get rid of preload, we will turn this backwards to loosen it so that way we can make this longer. But how do you figure out where you need it to be? For that, we're going to take a couple of measurements. Now behind me is a Sportsman 800. This has 9.5 inches of suspension travel. And look up how much suspension travel your ATV or UTV has. From there, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we take and we measure that unloaded, and then we measure it loaded. And when I say loaded, it needs to be with you on it, with all your gear on it. If you've got a plow on it, if you've got a rack on it, if you're going to have a cooler on it, make sure it's fully loaded down the way you're normally going to have it in use. And then that way we can take another measurement and see what we need to do. So the way that I prefer to measure it is we start out with everything fully unloaded. So we want the suspension at full droop, so we've got a stand underneath the back end here. What we're going to do is we are going to use a piece of tape here, and we are going to mark the point where we're measuring from just so we can be accurate and repeatable. So I'm going to make it right here. In order to measure how much suspension sag we're going to get, we're going to measure from that point down to the center of the axle here. And we are at 21.5 inches. Remember that number, because now we've got to measure it with it all loaded up. So now we've got the rider on it. We're going to take another measurement, and we are down to 20 3/4. So it only sank about 3/4 of an inch. That tells me that we've got to make sure that we go down another little bit to unload that spring a little bit. Now, part of the reason why it only sank that much is the springs that are used with the Bronco ATV shocks and UTV shocks, those are 10% stiffer. It's going to turn out giving you a better ride in the long run, but that's why we got to make sure that we adjust these right up front. So I'm going to get to work on that preload adjuster. In this case, you can see we've got just a very small difference. So we're going to need to back off that preload adjuster like I mentioned before, because we want to use 20 to 30% of that suspension travel. So we really need to be, remember I said 9.5 inches? We really want to be around 3 inches or so of suspension travel when we initially set the ATV on the ground and with all the load on it. So now we've adjusted the nut down, we've loosened it. The lock nut's even further. We haven't locked it in place yet. So we've got our rider back on. I am at 18.5. That's right where we want to be. We know we've got it set right. Time to tighten up that lock nut. Once we get that set, you're good to go. We're going to have you tighten up that lock nut again. A simple spanner wrench, which you can pick up at most local stores, will do the trick. And now it's set and not going to have any problems for you. On top of that, you can be sure your suspension is going to perform the best. If you've got more questions, make sure to check out our other videos and take a look at our other products too while you're here.